They weren't the largest Allied force, nor the most equipped. But when the German infantry heard they were facing U.S. Army Rangers, a ripple of dread spread faster than bullets. It wasn't superstition, it was reputation. These men trained to scale cliffs under machine gun fire, to infiltrate with silence and strike like ghosts, carried a name that echoed through German command like a whispered curse. It all started in the black pre-dawn hours on a cold French coast, where ordinary soldiers would have waited for daylight. But the Rangers? They climbed Pointe du Hoc vertical, slick, exposed, knowing full well that the enemy above had the high ground, the firepower, and the orders to kill anything that moved. Still, they climbed. And when the ropes were cut and comrades fell, they climbed faster. What German commanders couldn't understand was what kind of men volunteered for such death-defying missions. Who chooses to run toward fortified bunkers, while others duck? Who trains to operate behind enemy lines where backup is a myth and surrender isn't an option? The answer lay in the very DNA of the Rangers, handpicked, brutalized in training, built not just to fight but to adapt. They didn't follow traditional patterns. They didn't wait for orders to engage. They hit fast, disappeared faster, and left behind only wreckage and whispers. In North Africa, at Arzu, German troops first tasted the chaos these Americans brought. One moment, a quiet port. The next, gunfire exploding in alleys and doorways. Rangers burst through shadows with terrifying precision, clearing buildings, neutralizing gun nests, and then melting into the blackness before reinforcements could even react. Word spread up the German ranks like wildfire. These were not normal troops. They didn't fear death. They didn't follow predictable tactics. They were hunters in a jungle of concrete and sand. And by the time the war reached the hedgerows of Normandy, German patrols began to alter their routes to avoid sectors where Ranger activity had been reported. They didn't always know where the Rangers were, but the signs were there: shattered radios, slashed supply lines, and the eerie silence that preceded their attacks. Fear wasn't based on numbers. It was built on uncertainty, the terrifying sense that an enemy you couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't stop was already behind you. And that's exactly where the Rangers wanted to be. But it wasn't just fear on the battlefield, it was what the Rangers did after a mission that sent shivers through the enemy's high command. Because when one German general received a sealed intelligence report detailing how a single Ranger platoon held off an entire Waffen-SS advance with nothing but bayonets, smoke, and sheer madness, he wrote one line in red ink: find them, or avoid them, at all costs. That red ink message wasn't dramatized. It was preserved in post-war archives, scrawled with shaking hands by a general who had seen what most only read about in reports. The Rangers weren't just a military unit. They were a myth wrapped in flesh, and myths, unlike men, couldn't be reasoned with. In Belgium, as snow caked the forests near Elsenborn Ridge, a German battalion pushed forward under cover of whiteout. Their orders were clear: break through the Allied line. But the trees didn't answer back. They exploded. Flash charges, tripwires, and sudden bursts of fire from what seemed like ghosts in white camouflage dropped half the advance before they even reached the tree line. The rest ran. They never saw a full platoon. They never even saw the whites of their eyes. What they had seen was a psychological game perfected by the Rangers: disrupt at night, hit isolated checkpoints, cut fuel convoys silently, steal enemy maps, then return them altered. These weren't tactics found in manuals. This was primal war, designed not just to kill the body, but the morale. One German unit even believed, falsely, that the Rangers used specially trained wolves to track soldiers at night, so they lit fires in open fields out of sheer paranoia. The Americans didn't deny it. They let the fear grow. Back home, few Americans ever heard about these missions. They were classified, quiet. The Rangers didn't do it for the headlines. They did it because if they didn't, someone else's son, brother, or father would die tomorrow. And it was that mindset, that cold, clear focus, that made them so terrifying. These were men who counted survival as failure if they didn't complete the job. They didn't seek glory. They delivered results, fast, bloody, final. In Italy, one Ranger company reportedly moved through 4 enemy-held towns in a single night, leaving a trail of neutralized snipers, silent ambushes, and stolen German radios. The messages they sent back to German HQs? In German, luring patrols into traps, By the time dawn broke, an entire communication network collapsed without a full Allied offensive even starting. It wasn't just battlefield brilliance. It was psychological devastation. And it worked. By late 1944, elite German units began requesting transfers away from sectors known to be Ranger active. It was unofficial, embarrassing, but it was real. Because if you were stationed near them, you didn't sleep. You didn't relax. And you sure didn't go out alone after dark. That's why German troops didn't just fight the Rangers. They feared them. Not for what they saw, but for what they couldn't predict. The silent strike. The vanishing act. The shadow in the fog that never missed its mark. And for every medal the Rangers earned, there were a dozen silent victories, buried in missions the world was never meant to know. But the enemy knew. And they remembered.